The Dark Secret of WEATHEREND by John Bellairs. Chapter 7. Saturday, the 1st of December, was a cold, windy day. Anthony woke up feeling anxious, like a soldier who has just been told that he is going to be parachuting into enemy territory. For days he had been brooding about Anders Borkman and the evil ring of stones. Sometimes the whole situation seemed completely unbelievable. Could that nasty, cold-blooded man really control the weather? A year ago, Anthony would have said that the idea was just too fantastic. But he had seen a lot of strange things lately, and Emerson had made him realize that Borkman's statues were as dangerous, in their way, as atomic bombs. But even though Anthony was pretty scared, in the midst of his fear, he knew an expert was on his side. Emerson Eels had studied magic, and he would use his knowledge to take care of Mr. Borkman and his crazy plans. Anthony whiled away the morning. He rode down to the A&P with his dad and helped him bring the groceries home. Then he went out to the garage and watched his brother Keith tinker with the car. But while Keith tried to explain to Anthony about pistons and cylinder heads and camshafts, Anthony's mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about 3 o'clock that afternoon and the 4 grim stone statues. At a little after 2, Anthony went into the house and told his mother that he was going over to the high school athletic field to play touch football with some friends. Then he put on his red leather cap and his winter coat and headed off to begin his secret mission. Number 611 Pine Street, the home of Miss Eels, was the first stop. When he got there, he saw a gray truck parked in the driveway next to the house. It had a blue gas flame in a yellow halo and the words Hoosac Gas Company painted on the side. Next to the truck stood Emerson Eels, wearing gray coveralls and a peaked cap with the gas company emblem on the front. He was smoking a cigarette and trying to look nonchalant. Anthony thought Miss Eels was right. Emerson did not look like a gas man. He seemed too intellectual. Perhaps Borkman would think that Emerson was an out-of-work professor who had to take a job with the gas company to make a living. The front door of the house opened, and Miss Eels stepped out, looking like she was ready to go for a hike in the woods. She wore a heavy brown tweed sweater, padded blue winter jacket, sensible brown Oxfords, and white sweat socks. Anthony wondered what was in the big green bulging patent leather purse she was carrying. Emerson spotted the purse too and immediately grew alarmed. "What the dickens have you got there? Are you taking penny rolls to the bank?" "It's Grandma's old Colt 44 Dragoon pistol," she said, pulling it halfway out of her purse. "It doesn't have any bullets, but it looks impressive." Emerson made a great effort to control himself. "My dear sister," he said in a tight, strained voice, "we are not going to the Battle of Antietam. We are taking part in a quick, smooth, undercover operation. Please dump that piece of antique artillery in the house and come along. We're behind schedule. I told Borkman that I was coming to read his meter at 3. Miss Eels glanced disconsolately at the handbag. Then she disappeared into the house. When she came back, she was carrying a battered old field hockey stick. "Can I take this? It'll make me feel better if I've got something to defend myself with." Emerson covered his face with his hand. "Oh, all right. Jump in the back of the truck and let's get moving." Out into the country they drove, past the Rolling Stone Library and down into a hollow overhung by bare wintry trees. After about 10 minutes, they saw a high stone wall topped with spikes. In a few places, the old wall had collapsed, but it had been repaired and reinforced by a shiny new chain-link fence topped by 3 strands of barbed wire. Finally, the truck rounded a curve, and Anthony saw the main entrance of the estate, with its grim-looking gatehouse, boarded windows, and 2 stone gate posts. The gate was new, made of tubular steel and chain links, and a heavy steel lock held its two sections together. "Looks friendly, doesn't it?" said Emerson as he stopped the truck in front of the gate. Anthony and Miss Eels were crouching behind the front seat so they couldn't be seen from outside. "What's going on, Em?" whispered Miss Eels hoarsely. "Are there guards or machine gun nests? I can't see a blasted thing down here." "There aren't any guards," said Emerson calmly. "The whole place is remote controlled. There's a squawk box on one of the gate posts that you can yell into, and if Borkman wants you in, he just pushes a button and the gate swings open. Simple, eh? Now, you just wait here while I go talk to our friend." Miss Eels spoke again, and she sounded worried. "Em, I have a bad feeling about all this. I think we ought to turn around and skedaddle back home while we have the chance." Emerson snorted. "Oh, piffle, Myra. There are no guards on the estate. I think Borkman is too cheap to hire any, and I've asked that stupid dog be chained up while I'm there. Put all your worries out of your mind. Remember, I wouldn't have led you up here if I thought there was any real chance you'd get hurt. So stop fussing." Emerson got out of the truck, walked toward the gate, and spoke into the box. Sure enough, there was a loud bzzz, click, and the gate swung open. With a jaunty, cocksure smile on his face, Emerson got back to the truck and slammed the door. "See," he said as he started the engine. "No problems." Miss Eels made no reply, but in the darkness she reached out and squeezed Anthony's hands. "Good luck, kid," she whispered. They heard the gates swing behind them with a loud crash as they drove on. Then Emerson put on the brakes again. "Okay, everybody," he said brusquely. "Out you go. The tennis court is off to the left, and the grove with the statues is beyond it. Just do what I've asked, nothing else. I'll come back pretty soon and give a little beep on the horn. Be there when I honk." Anthony and Miss Eels clambered out of the back of the truck, pushed the doors shut, and the truck sped away in a cloud of exhaust smoke. Anthony stood blinking in the bright sunlight. Then he turned and looked at Miss Eels, and he almost laughed. She was holding the hockey stick upright like a shepherd's crook. It made her look like an elderly lady impersonating Bo Peep or the world's oldest field hockey goalie. "Laugh now," said Miss Eels, brandishing the stick. "We may need this dumb thing before today is over with." She straightened her glasses on her nose and marched off across the matted, frosty grass, with Anthony following behind her. They paused to look at the ruined tennis court. The concrete playing surface was cracked and pitted, and the wire fence that surrounded it was rusted and full of holes. The little building at one end had once had a red tile roof, but now half the tiles lay broken, crumbling heaps on the ground. Miss Eels sighed and looked around. "This place is certainly a mess, isn't it? Did I ever tell you that I was singles tennis champion of my class at Bryn Mawr in 1906? Well, I was. But time's a-wastin'. We'd better go have a look at these ghastly statues." Anthony and Miss Eels tramped on, past the tennis court and over a patch of weedy ground. Dead thistles hovered on tall stalks all around them, and the yellow grass felt spongy under their feet. Straight ahead was the cedar grove. It looked forbidding, a mass of inky green shadows under pale wintry sun. When they got to the grove, Miss Eels and Anthony found that there was no path leading to the open space in the middle, so they had to shove their way through the dark, perfumey boughs, which kept slapping them in the face and scratching at their arms and legs. As they battled their way through, the boughs resisted, as if they possessed their own hostile will. Anthony felt fear rising inside him, but he fought the panic down and struggled on. By the time he had reached the inner circle, he was weak and gasping for breath. There, before them, were 4 dark, rugged stones, looking every bit as sinister as they had in the garage. The eerie, staring faces and claw-like, groping hands gave the odd feeling that they were, well, somehow alive. It would not have surprised Anthony if those 4 masses of stone suddenly turned into pillars of smoke and spewed forth monstrous, fearful shapes. Anthony was glad he was not going to be here when Emerson and Miss Eels came at night to destroy them. Anthony looked at Miss Eels, and she glanced quickly back at him. Her face was red, and her hair was mussed, but she was trying hard not to act nervous or frightened. "Well now," said Miss Eels, forcing her mouth into a businesslike frown, "we'd better get moving because we don't have a lot of time. Let's find these holes, then hot-foot it back up to the tennis court and wait for Emerson to show up." And with that, she put down the hockey stick, stepped forward, and started to examine one of the stones. Cautiously, she put out her hand to touch the rough granite surface. "Ow!" she yelled, jerking her hand back. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she sucked at her fingertips. "Ow, ow, ow! That is hot, Anthony! Be careful." Anthony was startled. How could the stones be that hot? The sun hung low in the sky, and it was cold December afternoon. Then Anthony realized that he was sweating. The air inside this circle of trees was stuffy and humid. "Lucky I brought some gloves," said Miss Eels in a tight, strained voice. She unzipped a side pocket of her jacket and pulled out 2 dirt-caked gardening gloves. She put them on and grimly stepped forward again. Anthony hadn't brought any gloves. He'd have to do his investigating without touching the stones. Slowly, Anthony's eyes traveled up and down the surface of one of the stone pillars. A gaping skull mask glared down at him, and he flinched as his eyes met this cold, inhuman stare. He shuffled to one side and went on examining the stone. Ah! There it was! A round spot about the size of a penny. Clever old Emerson Eels was right again. "I found one, Miss Eels," Anthony called, pointing triumphantly. Miss Eels smiled and nodded. "Great! Mark the place with chalk and keep hunting. I haven't found any yet, but they may be cleverly... Ha! There's mine! Okay, we're really doing great." Excitedly, she fumbled in another pocket and came up with a squarish lump of white chalk. She marked the plugged hole with a small axe and moved on to the next stone. It took Anthony and Miss Eels only about 20 minutes to locate all 4 holes, but by the time they were finished, they felt as if they had been in this evil, airless place for hours. Anthony found that he was beginning to imagine things. At least, he hoped that he was imagining them. He kept thinking that the carvings on the stones were moving. When he looked one way, he would see, out of the corner of his eye, something shifting just a bit on one of the other pillars. And more than ever, now he found that he was having trouble breathing. It was getting harder and harder to fight down the panic. He wanted to leave. He wanted to leave now. "Come on, Miss Eels," said Anthony, grabbing his friend by the arm. "We've marked all the holes, so let's just..." Anthony's voice trailed away. He saw, to his horror, that Miss Eels was just standing there with a glazed look on her face and her arms hanging limp at her sides. Anthony hesitated a moment. Then he seized her by the shoulder and shook her violently. "Hey, Miss Eels, what's the matter? Are you okay? Please say something." What?" muttered Miss Eels thickly. "Who are, I mean..." And with that she came to with a jolt. She looked about wildly at the 4 grim dark stones, at the circle of shadowy trees, and at Anthony. What was I doing?" she asked in a wondering, scared voice. "No, don't tell me. I don't want to know. You're right. We've got to get out of here. Are you ready?" Anthony nodded. He picked up the hockey stick and handed it to Miss Eels. Then the 2 of them plunged back into the cedar boughs. It was even harder going out than coming in, but somehow they made it. They reeled into the open, and after several nervous backward glances, they headed toward the tennis court. When they got there, they did not stop but continued on till they got to the road. Emerson had told them that they were supposed to hide in the ruined building, but they'd had enough of enclosed spaces for now. They felt safer, somehow, just along the shoulder of the road. They waited. 15 minutes passed, then 30, 45, and then a full hour. The shadows of the roadside trees grew longer and longer. Then the sun set behind the distant hills, and the sky grew darker. With a sick, tight feeling in his stomach, Anthony knew that something had gone wrong. He peered anxiously up the winding drive. The white gravel of the road glimmered vaguely in the gathering darkness. When he spoke, his voice was a trembling whisper. Miss Eels, where's Emerson? What's wrong? How come he hasn't come back? Miss Eels's face was pale and drawn. She bit her lip and shook her head despondently. I don't know, Tony. I just don't know. She paced up and down a bit and then lost her temper. She picked up a stone and threw it at the tennis court fence. Blast my brother! She exclaimed in an angry, tearful voice. He always knows what to do. You can't tell him anything. You can't warn him or make him cautious when there's every reason to be cautious. Em's got it all figured out. Oh, this is awful, Anthony. What on earth are we going to do? Anthony looked around. He felt completely helpless. It was so dark that the tennis court building was just a shadow, and he couldn't see the evil grove of trees at all. Once again, panic was creeping over him. He wanted to get out of this awful, unnerving place. Even though he wanted that, he ought to stay and try to help Emerson. He wanted to be brave, but he was terribly, terribly afraid. Once again, he seized Miss Eels's arm and squeezed it. We've got to go, he hissed. They'll get us if we don't. Miss Eels pulled herself together. She set her jaw grimly and got a firm grip on her hockey stick. I want to go running up the road to Borkman's house, burst in on him, and pound knobs on his rotten skull. But I suspect that would not be a very bright idea, she said in a low voice. No, you're right. We've got to escape. But how? You saw the walls and the cyclone fence. This place is like a prison, and we didn't bring a flashlight with us. We're going to go stumbling about like a couple of blind bats in a brewery. Miss Eels paused. She pounded the butt of her hockey stick on the ground, took a deep breath, and let it out. She had made up her mind. Okay, Tony, she said in a determined voice. We may be doomed, but at least we'll go down fighting. We have to go back down the road toward the gate, and then pick our way along the fence until we find a weak spot. I saw a couple of places where the wall was broken and had been patched with chain link fence. Maybe we can climb the wrecked wall and get over the fence somehow. Miss Eels and Anthony started walking. The road was a pale ribbon in the starlight, and all around them the shadows of trees and bushes seemed to close in and hover over them. The silence was unnerving. Anthony would have been glad to hear the sound of a car passing on the road beyond the wall, or wind in the trees, or even the hooting of an owl. But there was nothing. Nothing but the sound of their footfalls on the gravel. Finally, Anthony saw the dim outline of the main gate. Hey, Miss Eels, he yelled, waving his arm. Look! Great, she muttered. Now, all we have to do is find a weak spot in the wall. Maybe over there. Miss Eels never finished her sentence. She heard a noise, an odd rustling. Fearfully, she peered off to her left and saw, by the side of the road, a heap of dead leaves. And though no wind was blowing, the leaves were stirring uneasily. As Anthony and Miss Eels watched, the leaves began to whirl and spin. Run, Anthony, yelled Miss Eels suddenly, and with that they were off, racing across the grass. The rustling behind them rose to an angry whirring. Miss Eels and Anthony ran faster, blindly, into the dark. Now they saw looming before them the great black shadow of the wall that surrounded the estate, and turning sharply to the right, they began to run alongside it. More dead leaves began to stir, and as he went pounding along full speed, Anthony saw a leaf rise up and fly at his face. It brushed his cheek, and he gave a wild yell. The leaf had cut his cheek. He felt the sticky wetness of blood. Miss Eels cried out, and he knew she must have been cut too. Up there, she yelled, waving her hockey stick as she swerved off suddenly into the shadow of the wall. Wall's broken, she gasped. Climb it, quick. These leaves'll kill us. Without knowing what he was doing or why, Anthony ran off after Miss Eels. In seconds, he was totally swallowed up by the darkness. Stumbling against a heap of stones, he fell forward onto his hands and knees, but Miss Eels had already dropped the hockey stick and was scrambling madly up a broken rocky slope. Anthony pulled himself to his feet and hurled himself up the wall after her. There was the chain-link fence that had been used to patch this part of the wall, and above him, outlined against the starry sky, was Miss Eels. She was peeling off her padded jacket and yelling commands at Anthony. Despite his confusion and fear, he managed to make out what she was saying. He was supposed to throw his coat over the barbed wire at the top of the fence to protect himself when he jumped over it. But as Anthony began unbuttoning his coat, a sound like 1,000 angry bees rose from the darkness below them. A cloud of leaves had turned into a spiraling tornado that surrounded the two of them. Anthony covered his face and with his hands and fell to his knees, screaming. There was no escape. He was going to die.